Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Bay Area Content Marketing Meetup. Today, as with many of our recent meetups, we're going to be talking about AI. We have with us a former presenter to our group, Floyd Smith. Floyd is co-author of a book called Computing For Dummies, which he spoke about, I think, earlier this year. Today, we're not talking about quantum computing, but we're talking about generative AI. Floyd is going to talk about how you can create an ebook with generative AI. I know many of us have created ebooks. I've never used AI to create one yet, but Floyd I think, has tried that and is going to share his experiences. He's going to show you how to use Gen AI to get the performance boost you want in your ebook with the level of quality you need. Welcome back, Floyd, and take it away.
Okay, thank you. Great introduction. So I will go straight into sharing the slides. Just one comment before I start on the slides, which is that I'm very interested in your guys, any experience you guys have, including if you're able to do more or a lot less than what I'm sharing here. So this is the opinion of myself and a team of professionals I got to work with. At the same time, there are a lot of different ways to skin this cat. So let me get to, I'm just looking at the ways they do this. So I want to share the entire screen. There we go. We'll do this, and then I will switch. I know that's terrifyingly confusing. And then slideshow, play from start. There we are. Everyone's seeing LLMs for content creation?
Yes.
Okay, great. And my subtitle, so just in case everybody's new at all of this, ChatGPT is the best known large language model tool. So a large language model can be somewhat sardonically described as I set up an AI tool, I go and ingest everything on the internet, whether people want me to or not, feed it into the large language model, and then have it analyze and build a model of basically how to write using existing content. So the core functionality of an LLM is that you give it a prompt and it uses that prompt to hone in on an area of its rules around content and start spitting back to you a response to your prompt. And as it does this, it will create a few words, and there's some randomness in the words that it starts with. And then once it creates several words, it then predicts from everything it's ingested and everything it's quote unquote learned from what it ingested, what the next word should be and the next word and the next word. It doesn't even work at the level of words. It actually works at the level of tokens, which are about 4 characters long. So this is stitched together. Whatever you're getting back from the LLM, as amazing as it is sometimes, is stitched together from what it's learned from all the content it's ingested. So if you're writing about something that's well discussed out there on the interwebs, I'm sorry, there's also a fine-tuning step where they run things in front of people. And for instance, if the LLM spits back obscenities, because there were obscenities out there in its training material, the humans start teaching it not to do that, to avoid going toward the obscenities, keep it toward the more normal content. So that's the basis of these pretty amazing results. And it really is just a version of what it was trained on, which is what all of us have put out on there on the internet. And a lot of the controversy around LLMs is that training model. And for instance, the New York Times doesn't like that their stuff was used for training. So one of the LLMs has made a deal with News Corp to license their content. So that's some of the controversy you'll hear is based on that model. So I am an experienced, I'll go into my background in the slides ahead. So I'm going to share my background. I'm going to share details of a long and challenging assessment that I was one of the astronauts for. There were two writers, each backed by a team, and I'll share how that went. I'll share my conclusions, which are provisional because it's just the experience of myself and a small group of other people, and I even have my own take on, the facts, right? Everyone gets their own opinion, but you don't get your own facts. But the facts that I was exposed to are facts that most people haven't gotten exposed to yet. So it was fun. And then get your input at the end. All right, I'm going to cover these fairly quickly, but I thought that in a presentation about the difference between a human author and the results of a AI process, it would be good for you guys to have some of this background, and I'm sure we can share the slides afterward. There's carefully nothing personal or too personal and nothing confidential in here, which I'll get to because that becomes an issue later on. I'm in startups. My stepson and daughter are in large established companies. That seems kind of backwards, and also leads to the uncomfortable conclusion that they're much smarter than I am. And I even mistyped. My stepson is an executive at Meta. My daughter's at Google. My stepson's at Meta. I'll fix that before I share with you guys. Okay, and there we go. I was obsessive with words and reading, which is actually a challenge in using LLMs, because the results of LLMs, because it's somewhat of a weighted average of stuff that's already out there, it tends to be either okay or good. It is very hard for it to achieve greatness because it's drawing from stuff that's already out there, and only a few things out there are great, right? So a lot of us are very demanding. So we have a hard time getting started with LLMs because the work isn't up to the level, like we would be used to the work that the people in this group right now could produce, right? Like, oh, what's your take? And Rich sends back something brilliant. And Andy sends something great. And I go, yeah, this is great. And my brain starts firing. The LLM isn't up to that level. So where a lot of people go, wow, we kind of go, okay, because that's what we do. And I'm an example of that. I got into tech around age 20 and have not left for much. I did have a period of being a climate activist, using my tech skills for a while. Then returned. I've written a bunch of books. My books have sold more than 1 million copies over the years, which always amazes me. Most of that was earlier in my career when these books people depended more on books. Now they depend more on what they find online. But I returned to the Dummies line and co-authored Quantum Computing for Dummies, as was mentioned a minute ago. And then I've done some AI work that I'll describe. And then some of my publishing background. So I've been published my first book when I was 25, got a nice early start in that and was kind of bold in asking if I could do that and was rewarded. At first, it felt like I was being punished, but in fact, let me describe some of that punishment because it's a bit relevant. When I wrote my first Dummies book, they edit pretty carefully. And they said, send us a first chapter and we'll edit it, and then send us a couple of chapters and keep cycling through because you'll learn from our comments and it'll get easier as you go along. I said, yeah, right. Tell me about it. So I waited until late in the process, and then I liked having all the chapters open at once so I could move things around and take what I learned in one chapter and use it to improve another and so on. So I submitted the whole book at once. And then they sent all the chapters back to me. I'm sure they had a laugh. And every sentence and most of the words were redlined or commented. And a lot of it was just that I hadn't absorbed the rules of how to write a dummies book. So my syntax was different than they were used to. I would have too much humor or not enough. So I didn't do that progressive learning, and I had to rewrite. It was harder to edit the book than it was to write it in the first place. But that mindset, then I learned to be pretty darn careful, although we all make mistakes, as I did a minute ago. And that informs my approach to working with LLMs. And then I've been interested in AI and tech in general. Quantum computing will be used for AI as it gets more powerful. And I got to do some writing related projects. Just to tip my hand a little bit up front, one of the things I'm actually taking away from preparing this presentation is just to make myself use the tools, because we're all good enough to do something quick ourselves. And it's slower at first to fire up a tool to do something you can do in your head. But once you get good at using the tools, you'll actually do not necessarily quicker, but I think better work. And I'll show you what I mean. Okay, so the experiment was that we took two teams and each of us had to write an ebook. And one team was writing an ebook for a project that would normally be delivered to the public. And I was doing a team for an ebook that would normally be a commercial, more limited audience project. Um, so we had one experienced author on each team, and we came to very similar conclusions. And then we shared a support team of a project manager, editor, and business lead. And then we also shared an AI tech expert and a tool tech expert. Um, the teams were each given access to a tool, which unfortunately I'm under NDA about. And I'm not sure that it'll ever be made available to the public. It might be taken out of NDA so people can talk about it, but or so people can share it. So I can't share a screenshot of the tool because it's under NDA, but I've listed some of the things that are in it. And of course, if you've used other LLMs, you'll be envious of what the tools they were able to give us. Okay, and so this is a description of the tool. So basically, imagine how, like in Word, you can doll up a style sheet, right? And you can make your document look very different. You can make it look Old English, or you can make it look very light and modern. You can make it look like a book. You can make it look like a blog post, depending on the style sheet you use. But there are a lot more variables for large language models than, and I'm going to stop and ask for questions after just on this area after this piece, because I don't know how familiar you all are. But basically, when you work in an LLM, you first give it a background prompt that sets the context, and you'll say something like, think of yourself as an English professor at a small Midwestern college with a particular interest in the Middle Ages. And here is some text that is typical to what you would analyze. And here is some text that is typical to what you would write. And you might have a couple of pages of this background prompt that kind of is if you ever read a spy novel, it's the legend that a spy is given, meaning, who are you? When you're being interrogated, who do you say you are? Where did you grow up? What's your family's names? All of these things that you have to learn. You can do a version of that with the LLM. So you kind of set it up to imitate someone. And that helps guide where it goes to grab content from when it's putting your response back to you. And that's in the background. That's not the prompt you send it to ask it to do something. It's like the background story, but it's still called a prompt, even though it really is just background information. You set the temperature, which is how ambitious you want it to try to be. Do you want it to be very careful and just look for text that directly follows what you prompted about? Or do you want it to look around more widely and wildly? More temperature tends to get more creativity, also gets more hyperbole and hallucination is the word I was looking for. You can set the context length. When you get tokens when you use an LLM, and as you prompt it and get responses, it burns tokens. And the more context it is you give it, the better job it can do. And context is additional text that it adds to all the internet information that it's scarfed as it comes up with your answer. So if I make the context several pages about motorcycles, I can then get a better response to questions about motorcycles, but it's limited by what I share. Our tool allowed us to include a bunch of Word documents or PowerPoints as background. So it's kind of like we could semi-customize the LLM for each project that we wanted to work on. So imagine if you're working with a company and they've done several white papers, and you can put those white papers into this tool as background documents that help you then to write an ebook from that company. Very helpful. But this tool had not yet been extended to include diagrams or art, which are two of the most useful things for ChatGPT. I think we're all word nerds, and then our graphic skill will vary. And it didn't include the data analysis area, which I haven't made use of before. So let me stop here and see, especially if you don't know that much yet about LLMs and I've overwhelmed you a bit, anything about my background, my AI background, or the work that we did in this experiment. And I can't say the company or the specific projects that we did, but I'll say as much as I feel I can.
Hello?
Yes, hi. Hi, Nima.
One question. So, um, I just know a little bit about AI and how to use Chat GPT. I'm a little bit new to it. So could you give me a little bit more specific definition on, what did you say, a LM?
Right, right. So the tools ChatGPT, Perplexity.ai, and several others are all used based on the same underlying technology, which is called a large language model. And the large language model has two meanings. The intended meaning is that it's a very large AI model for producing language. So by large, it means that it needs a lot of computer power to run, and it takes some time for it to produce results. But the other way of looking at it, the more skeptical way for all of us who write copyrighted or confidential material, is that it scarfs, to train it, you scarf up a large amount of language, and you just run it through the model. And what the model does is it learns how humans tend to arrange words. So if we gave it a transcript of me talking now, it would say, okay, so usually after this word is this word is this word. And it would say, but sometimes after those two words is this different word. And so it creates all these branches, and it's like a bush, going out. And so if you think of it that way, as a bush going out, the more information it scarfs up, the more branches and little twigs there are on that bush, the denser the bush is. So when you then, just to finish that, when you give it a prompt, it actually starts on a branch of that bush and will go out to the twigs. And that's actually your answer, is that specific set of branches and twigs from the trunk of the bush all the way out to the outer edge of it. And that's one answer, and you ask it a different question, it then goes through a different path through the bush and delivers you that answer, that group of words, which is all that is to it. And I'd be happy to talk to you more offline, Nima, if you want to go deeper.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Okay, so good stuff. That's good orientation. And here are my learnings about AI. So these are, of course, my experience. I'm just speaking for myself, but these conclusions were shared by the team I was working by both of the teams that we went through this experiment with, and included a lot of experts, including some technical people, where if there was an easy fix, they would have fixed it. So this is, it's more than one person's experience, certainly just my conclusions, but broadly agreed with by the people I've worked with. Rosemary has not delved into this. Rosemary Briscoe is a speaker who's spoken to the group a couple of times now and an expert on this. I wouldn't say that she would agree with me 100%, but she generally says, don't use AI for final content, right? Use it as a tool to help you get there, but don't deliver to the client or to the audience what the AI puts out. And then a friend of mine has a son who graduated from UCSD, a school I respect a lot because I went there some. And he says similar. He uses ChatGPT for schoolwork, but he never turns in something that ChatGPT wrote. Uses it for comparison, reference, as a seed to get started. So here is the magic table. And I don't know if you can all see all of it. You might have to move the picture of people just for a minute. So basically, let me take you through this chart. The quality levels on the left, high is the top row, medium is the middle row, and low quality is the bottom row. And then across the bottom is an outline or summary, a short piece, a medium piece, or a long piece. And let me tell you my experience is that, first of all, for high quality, which is what we're all used to working in and where we start, it can do a decent outline or summary, especially if you adjust the prompt some, but it even can't produce a truly high quality short piece because it tends to be repetitive, and it tends to say in 10 words what most of us would say in 5 or 6. So you can't even trim it. You actually have to make it sharp and penetrating prose, you actually have to rewrite it. You actually have to use different words. You can't just cut its words. You can cut some of its words, but then you have to rewrite the rest of them in order to make it really be on point, as we try to be. However, see, the reason that we're disappointed and a lot of other people are excited, the fact that it can do low and medium quality work for even short pieces is incredible to people. I mean, it's just a computer, right? And it gives you a response that seems to be as good as a human. And in some ways it is. That's why, for instance, LLMs are pretty good at taking tests. One of the most impressive things about ChatGPT in the early days was that it did well on some tests. Well, those are they're short pieces on specific topics. And what you're proving on a lot of those tests is that you can write it all and that you can draw in some relevant facts into your conclusion. Well, that's that medium quality short piece green square rectangle here on my chart. And we're like, oh, that's the best it can do. And other people are like, wow, it can do that. So that's why there's the differing responses. Nobody's dumb and everyone's seeing the same facts. But it is truly impressive that ChatGPT can do that. But we all work at the high quality and medium and longer piece end of things. So it can't do what we can do. So we're not as impressed. The yellow things with the yin yang symbol on it means that the tool could do that with some prompting and work, right? With some effort. And I would say even for now, I'll share more. I'll share more in a minute. But this is, and I'm going to ask you to wait till the end, but I'm very interested if any of you have different experience from this. Either you couldn't even get it to do short stuff, an LLM to do short stuff, or you had better luck than I did getting it to do long stuff. I'm gonna make one exception. You see this medium square that I've marked with a red X? I got to review someone else had gotten some output about being an adoptive parent from ChatGPT. And they were asking me to make sure it would get through an AI checker. So they were asking me basically to add some detail to make sure it wasn't too wordy and so on. And the work from ChatGPT was not up to my standards. It was good enough for kind of a background section of a website, like if you were running an agency doing this. The quality was good enough that I would know more after I read this stuff, and I would feel somewhat reassured. And once I checked the details and made sure it was accurate. So it was useful, right? It was not impressive. It was not incisive. It was not what we would call good writing, but it was good enough writing and it was useful. So if your purposes are general enough, you can push the model into doing a little more. Of course, then the person had to get an expert like me to check it before they could put it out to make sure that it wasn't too wordy, wrong, or making writing mistakes that people would laugh at. Okay,
Floyd,
so,
can I share a really quick example or story?
Yeah, please.
So I once wrote an article. It was about how to view people's LinkedIn profiles to do user persona research. So if it's like some person, you might not know them, but I cataloged all the different fields of a LinkedIn profile and what it can tell you about that person. So if it's like a CMO, you can start to do some research on the CMO user persona by looking at all these fields. So then this was ChatGPT 3, so it's probably within 6 months after ChatGPT first came out. So my article was about maybe 2,000 words. So I said, I gave it the premise of my article to ChatGPT and said, write it. And then I I still have it saved somewhere, but I thought it did a real scary good job at coming close to what I wrote. So
Okay,
it would
good.
be like, yeah, medium, and I think the quality was it was pretty darn good. So
Okay.
it kind of
Good.
scared me.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to share about that example with the adoptive parents piece, is that sometimes for the right topic where there's a lot of information out there on the web, and the point isn't to write sharply, but maybe in a more informative and reassuring kind of way, it can get into that square, right? So yeah, I agree with you. It's a mixed bag. I probably should have put that one. In fact, in retrospect, I probably should put that one as a yellow, because sometimes it will not do what you want it to do. And we were on our two teams, we were trying to write to the quality level of a very experienced writer with a lot of information behind them and a very demanding client or audience, right? So that made that one tougher. So good point. Thank you, Dennis. I share your kind of in between response sometimes. It's like, wow, that's pretty good, or wow, I sure wouldn't show that to my boss. Sometimes the same content gets the two different reactions. Okay, good. So the good news is it's pretty good at summaries and table of contents. I have some tips I'll share in a minute. It's good for research, like what's out there on the internet about this. As Dennis was saying, it produces credible drafts that I would mostly use for inspiration. And like I said, sometimes surprises you with the text quality. So yeah, Dennis, I agree with you. In terms of what you can rely on for a generic project that's in a hurry and has a demanding audience, I wouldn't quite trust it. But if you're doing a lot of work and you want to try it on ChatGPT first, then I think some of the work would be usable depending on the purpose. The bad news is it's wordy and repetitive text, and it's wordy almost down to the word level, where it's using words that you and I might not choose, and where it takes longer to say the same thing. The biggest issue that we came up at the ebook level is that typically an ebook writer will be looking at, let's say, for example, 5 to 7 source documents, and they're trying to summarize and explain and then adding their own experience to make something interesting. And what happened with this tool that we were using is it was I was trying to do a 5-chapter ebook. It kept using the same example it used the same example in 3 different chapters because it couldn't look at it holistically. It could only focus on what it was writing at any one time. And since it couldn't write more than 2 or 3 pages well, I had to cobble the ebook together from 2 or 3 page pieces, but that then left the LLM free to go back and use the same couple of good examples over and over. And then we had to check that. And so then I had to assemble all of the charts and examples from the original and spread them out among the ebook. And by that time, I was doing more work than if I'd written it myself. But the result might actually, because of that careful approach, the result might actually have been better. I'll talk about that in a minute. I found that if you tell it to write 3 or 4 or 5 pages, it often will write 2.5 pages and that's it. It almost won't do more. I hope someone knows how to get past that limitation. And then you have to check everything for hallucination and errors. The tricky thing is it makes different errors than a human would. It'll say like, let's see, people commonly experience that thus and so, and it sounds very credible. And then you go to do some research, and whatever thus and so was, very rarely happens to anyone. It's trying to sound human, and it's trying too hard. It's like a person at a party in college who starts lying about their sports achievements or something. They're trying to impress people, and of course it ends up being unimpressive when you find out it's not true. The LLM can be like that. So really just a couple more things. You can't drop in replace a skilled author with LLMs, but sometimes it'll surprise you. It can be used for research, early drafts you use for inspiration. And I didn't get to look at diagrams, art, or data analysis. And often, in fact, the most discouraging thing I've learned in writing for a long time is that often the best thing you can do as a writer is do the diagram first and then do the writing, because it's often the diagrams that gets more attention and is more memorable than, and your words end up supporting it. So as someone who loves words, I hate that conclusion, but it is where I've gotten to. And we didn't include that in our work, so it's a big missing piece. So I did come up, though, with a new workflow. If you map out your resources, if you really take your time up front, more than most of us do, because we're pretty good at what we do, if you really map out the resources you have and your goals through your work, whether it's a 10-page white paper or a 50-page ebook, map the input that you have to each section that you're going to be creating. And then you use the LLM for the draft, and you basically take the piece of input that it should be looking at, and you load it into the background prompt so that it has that information. Use the LLM to produce it. And then you kind of have it, if you're using a big screen, you kind of have the LLM's input on one side, and then you write your own piece. You don't necessarily copy and paste, but you make sure that you include all of the good stuff from the LLM's output, plus your own best work. And since you've taken a close look at the resources, that can actually lead to a better result with about the same amount of time it would take you to write it yourself. So you're basically using the LLM as a benchmark to make sure that you're including everything that you can, and as a source of a couple of good ideas that you might not have come up with on your own. And so I would say that for a whole ebook, so to me, it doesn't save time. If anything, it can improve quality. Using it carefully can improve quality for high quality work. And then, so for an ebook, you can only use LLMs to actually write the ebook. If it's of moderate quality, or if each chapter is quite different from the others, and you use a careful process like what I'm describing, and check your work carefully, you could use it for that, but you'd end up doing quite a bit of work to get there. And then a couple of comments on getting started with creation, text creation yourself. Use the tools for research. It's a big time saver. Ask it to produce summaries of what's out there. It's a big help and stops you from missing obvious stuff. The worst thing is when you hand a piece to someone and they take a quick look at it and they go, what about this really important thing that everyone talks about in this area? And you didn't get it. You don't have it in your piece. And it's just awful. That's the worst feeling that I have whenever I work on something. The LLM will really help you avoid that, because it'll spit back conventional wisdom to you. And you always want to consider conventional wisdom. You don't want to parrot it. And so a couple of things that I mentioned before, and considering a team approach with the LLM. So treating it as a writing assistant or junior writer, for you to then go in and be Michelangelo and put the genius work on the roof of the Sistine Chapel, but your assistant can go do the prep diagrams for you and tell you what some of the other sculptors down the road are doing before you start on your own stuff. And I think that's it. So questions, experiences, and disagreements. I appreciate what Dennis shared. Anybody else have similar?
We have a question from Nima in the chat. She asks, what types of prompts give the best response for a summary?
Yes. First of all, three things I would say. First of all is to give it a strong persona, like you're a literature professor, or you're the manager of a company, or you're an expert writer, so tell it who it is, because that's who it's going to write this summary as and who it's going to write it for. Then be very clear about the topic and the area that you're working in. A lot of people write lazy prompts and then they get poor results and then they give up. But instead you tell it just what the topic is and who the work is going to be for, right? At the educational level, and to match the interests of a software engineer. Thank you, Dennis. and then be ready and willing to go through it a couple of times. Consider, for especially for a summary, consider adjusting the temperature rating, which is basically the let me just jokingly call it the crazy rating. So if you turn crazy down to 0, it'll be very boring and straightforward. And if you turn crazy all the way up, there might quite a bit likely be errors in it, but it might come up with something really interesting that you hadn't considered yourself. So I would say set it up with a persona, tell it who it is, give it a lot of specifics about what you want in the summary, and consider playing with the crazy rating.
I had a question, if I may.
Yes, Rich.
And first of all, Floyd, thank you for sharing and presenting with the meetup today. Yeah, I see a pattern here, right? I shared a link to your quantum computing presentation. We'll likely have you present again in the future if you would. So my question is around how have your experience, perception of using the tools in this way changed over time? Are you seeing incremental improvements, fast improvements? Is the output about the same? Like, what if anything has changed? Because likely, if you gave this presentation from 6 months from now, it's a different beast, right? So, any color there you can add?
First of all, that's a great question, Rich. And I actually, when I was scheduling this, I purposefully tried to time it for shortly before ChatGPT 5 comes out, because of exactly your question. I didn't want to be, the press of events to make, I really wanted to assess a moment in time. And I felt that I had a solid conclusion. Of course, we were just having a back and forth, me and Dennis, about some of the finer points of it, but we're talking about similar experiences with a couple of differences in what we experience and how we view it, right? We're on the same page, roughly, even if we're in different spots on the page. Sure. And I think that once the next generation comes out, I think maybe what I would guess is that there will be more times where you kind of go, wow, that was actually pretty good. I think all the problems we're talking about will still be there, but maybe the work will shift toward more of the good and occasionally really good, and less of the bad, less of the wordy, things like that. So that's my guess. So that's how I started out, with a lot of hope and fear around these tools, as a lot of people. Wow, this will do a lot for me, and oh dang, that might take my job. Both have decreased with a good understanding of the current state of the art. But to finish answering your question, I think the next year may raise both my hope and fear levels back up again.
Yeah, 3 follow-up comments. Again, thank you. Timing is everything. So I've had some schedule changes such that one of our fellow meetup community members, Erica Willette, had been scheduled to present, and I couldn't cover it, Dennis couldn't cover it, and it looked like we were going to have to punt, and the calendar was going to be it was going to be September. And luckily, Rosemary saved the day. She's back from here. She was able to host, because I didn't want to have Erica have to redo her entire presentation. I mean, the thing is, she's ready now. So I understand in terms of your window about before ChatGPT 5 come out, I haven't really been paying attention. When they speculate when that's happening, I should pay more attention. 2 other related comments, and I'll drop links in here for everyone. Rosemary Briscoe, another co-organizer and OG here on the meetup, shared a link to a Goldman Sachs report on AI. I tend to print things. If it's more than 10 pages, I'm not going to read I need the ink on paper. And it's top of mind, Gen AI, too much spend, too little benefit. Is it a bubble? So it's from a different perspective, but it's telling. And there's a lot of expert opinions there. And then finally, longtime Oracle and VMware colleague and friend of mine, Marius Chorda, and community member, just posted on LinkedIn, posing the provocative question, are AI making traditional websites obsolete? And so I'll share these as related extracurriculars for folks. And again, thank you, Floyd, for presenting. Appreciate it.
You're very welcome. Yes.
Yes, I would put the call out there. Anyone wants to unmute. Have you used generative AI to create content, whether it's short or long? And if so, we'd love to hear your experiences.
I had one question before people share their experiences.
Sure.
Floyd, were you at all concerned with this experiment, like around copyright? Like if this was for a certain, an organization that wanted to use it and present it as their own, or maybe retain some copyright for it, was that at all a consideration as you were using the tool? And because basically what I've heard from lawyers is like, if you use AI at all, it's not copyrightable.
Okay, so that's a very good question. And so I've taken two extreme approaches to it. When I was working on my quantum computing book, I wrote an email to my publisher, and I was very careful to do it in email so there'd be a paper trail. I said, I have never used ChatGPT, and I'm not going to start until this project is over. So I actually committed to not ever even fire it up. And the reason was those questions that you just raised were at a very high level of uncertainty in those first few months after ChatGPT came out. And I did not want any clouding of my author contribution to the book. Even during the book, I learned more. Like I said, my hope and my fear both dropped. I got less worried about it. So I think that there's a certain level. I think if you follow the level of human intervention and even partnership that I described here, you wouldn't fall subject to that. But I think a lot of stuff is going to end up getting copyrighted that probably shouldn't have been, based on what you said. Pure ChatGPT output and Perplexity output probably shouldn't be copyrightable. And then there is an ethical question too, as to how much you should use these tools based on the fact that not everyone is happy about the fact that their stuff was used to train it. So that's the other end of it. The input to ChatGPT is controversial. The input process is controversial. How we use the output is controversial. But I would still say, like, if I wrote another book, I would write my publisher saying, nothing that I submit will come from ChatGPT. That would allow room for me to even have ChatGPT do a draft of every single page of the book, but I always start with a blank screen when I start writing, and I use it to kind of challenge me to make sure that I'm including everything it thinks is important or it came up with, as well as the stuff I would have done on my own. Thanks for that share, Rich. So yeah, tricky question, and I've been very careful at sometimes with the answer.
I can give an example, actually a couple examples. I use AI quite a bit. I used it to create an outline for a white paper that I released recently. A couple of you are familiar with that, on content operations. And typically what I do is I will use a couple of different AI tools, and I'll take like the pieces and parts, like what my own brain thinks is the best pieces and parts. And I usually do tons of tweaking and all of that stuff. I'm also a professor, so I teach an MBA level marketing course, and I am using AI in the classroom. So we are using AI to do some activities like segmentation and research and stuff like that.
Great. So really similar recommendations to me is you can use it for a lot of things, but not usually finished work at a professional level.
Yep.
Thank you for the talk, Floyd. My name is Shobana, and I'm VP of Marketing at Blaze, a no-code platform. And hi again, Rich and Dennis. It's good to see you. And I was intrigued by the topic, and I joined. And what I would like to add to the dialogue is that I manage an SDR team, and they can't write emails. So I've been kind of working with Claude, and it's been quite good for me. I think it's been a little better than ChatGPT to generate email sequences. And these are short, pithy emails to drive demos or signups. So it's been good for that, but not so good for eBooks, I will admit.
Okay, good. Thank you. That's very helpful, and I appreciate especially the positive use case, because I have been horrified by SDR emails in my employment position sometimes too. There are exceptions, but some of them that we sent out from our company, I was really embarrassed when I saw them.
Hi, I'm Dana Lynn, and I work for a tech company, and I manage a small team of writers. Probably most of what I do these days, about 50%, is editing. And I have found that our writers have been experimenting with AI. Many of the people in the company have been experimenting with AI. Our company has come up with its own little chatbot, chat
There you
GPT
go. Yeah.
thing, which is great. I'm just going to really echo things that you were saying, Floyd. I mean, the longer the content, the worse the quality. Things like outlines, things like emails, things like social media content actually are pretty good. Short, snappy, and lists. I feed in a lot of information and say, like, summarize this, or what are the key points, what are the key benefits, key takeaways, those types of things. But what I find is editing copy that's written with AI is so painful, it takes me longer than it would take to write in the first place. So until it gets better, I really encourage people to not use it to generate too much long form content.
Nice, thank you. I really appreciate that experience and rough agreement with my conclusions. We all have our fine points. And you found more use for it in the shorter ones.
Yes.
Other comments or questions? Todd
Yeah,
or
I have
Tom? Oh, go ahead, Jose.
I have a quick question for Floyd. I'm Jose, and I tutor and teach Spanish. TalktomeInSpanish.com, and I just wanted to ask you if you think that AI or LLMs are good to generate conversations, because it's more about learning, like you said, how to communicate and how to speak, or the structure of the language. So do you think that the LLMs are good to create possible conversations between two people? Just an example.
Actually, to combine what you're asking with Rich's point from earlier, I actually think it's kind of fun to do that now, but not necessarily productive. But I
Okay.
really think it's one of those things where the next year or two of work is probably going to switch that to where it's not quite good enough now, to where it will be good enough, or kind of low key fun, lower pressure fun, or lower pressure type of stuff. So my personal answer at the level of quality that I want for something I'm going to spend my time on is not quite there yet, but I can see how it could just, it's just like I know enough Spanish to cause an international incident myself, and to embarrass our country if I ever try to represent us in Spanish. But there's a certain amount of work where you'd start to say, okay, he's getting by. Like he could work. He wouldn't be the expert Spanish speaker, but he can get
Okay.
that kind of. And I think we're below that
Okay.
bar now, but I can see it, off in the future.
Thank you.
If I could, I would just add to that it's interesting that the model is kind of like a bad pun. The way in which we interact with the technology is a conversation. So when I am using ChatGPT to help it with my whatever task I have, I am talking to it, and it's replying in conversational language. And like I feel like to get something done, I'm having a productive conversation. So I would have to think that for like learning language, there's got to be some like slam dunk use case out there of a company that's created like a Spanish learning chatbot, which if you're probably just OpenAI under the covers, it probably works really well, where the chatbot is speaking Spanish, and maybe you're speaking to both English and Spanish to try to learn. I'm sure it works, or I would have to think it works really well for that use case.
It's interesting. Dennis and I are doing a nice point counterpoint, and I really think it's less about our writing experience or even our analytical capabilities, and more just that Dennis is a really nice guy and he finds the positive in things. I'm like this cold, skeptical cynic looking for mistakes. So we have the same facts and the same background, and we come to different conclusions. And some of it's just personality, I think.
Yeah, I have to drop, sorry to multitask. I dropped a few more links for next Thursday. Dennis, we got two in one. If you're virtual, join
right.
the Zoom. If you're in the San Francisco Bay Area, I hope to see you all in San Mateo.
Thanks, Rich. Yeah, I think we're about out of time anyway. But yeah, on next week, in addition to the in-person in San Mateo, we have another talk, and it's going to be on influencer marketing. So with that, we are out of time. Floyd, thanks so much for joining us.
Great discussion. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah. And we'll talk to all of you soon. Have a great rest of your day.
Cheers. Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.